about four cats not taken as a way of, rather than giving a mechanical summary of the previous 25 lectures, to pick out the four central areas where, as I said early on in the course, we're going to be paying attention to paths that might have been taken that weren't taken when there was scope for choice. And then finally, we're going to end with agendas for democratic reform, the sorts of political reforms that would make it more likely that the kinds of policies I have been discussing in the last two lectures could actually be successfully pursued. But let's go all the way back, first of all, to September. And there were really two central motivating questions of the course. The first is, how did we get from the euphoria and optimism that we saw at the end of the Cold War to the politics of fear and resentment that has swept so much of the democratic world since 2016? And then secondly, what are the prospects for a better politics going forward? So if we reflect on those two questions from the standpoint of what we have been doing over the past 3.5 months, I think there are two related answers to the first question. The first one is, especially in the period of what I was calling the early post-Cold War era, that is up to the financial crisis, geopolitical arrogance and uncritical embrace of neoliberalism at home and the Washington consensus abroad. And if you wanted the bumper sticker for the geopolitical arrogance, there are plenty of candidates, but I think this anonymous, what turned out to be Karl Rove quotation that I showed you earlier is probably the winning candidate when he said, we're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality, and while you're studying that reality judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities which you can study too, and that's how things will sort out. We are history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left just to study what we do. And this was in October 2004, in the run-up to the election in which George W. Bush would be re-elected, and unusually with increased majorities on Capitol Hill. Usually the president's party loses seats, but in a re-election bid, but he actually increased his majority in 2002 as well. So there was some reason for that arrogance, you might think, and it certainly informed their policies in the international arena. If you wanted the winning bumper sticker candidate for the uncritical acceptance of neoliberalism at home and the Washington consensus abroad, it has to be this statement by
those of us who have looked to the self-interest of lending institutions to protect shareholders' equity, myself especially, are in a state of shocked disbelief.
And we, as you will recall, we played the longer excerpt of that interview in which he admitted that his models had broken down. And I think that is, again, captures the uncritical acceptance of the neoliberalism at home, Washington consensus abroad. If I talk about the second big answer to the first question, it has to be the failure to take account of the long-term changes in the national and global political economies. And just to remind you again here of some of the key points about this, this is a slide I showed you of the mirror image, or the mirror image of the graphs depicting the decline of industrial jobs over, this is 26 OECD countries between 1960 and 2018, and the fragmentation of political parties, the weakening of political parties, and I told you a story about that. The left of center parties became less able to defend unionized workers, they defended them less well, and they defended fewer and fewer of them, and so workers hemorrhaged to other parties, as in, say, in Germany, to Der Linke, the far-left Marxist Party, and the Greens, and eventually to populist parties such as the Alternative for Deutschland. This in turn led to fragmentation of parties on the right as they saw opportunistic possibilities of picking up seats, and so we get this very substantial fragmentation of political parties, which is going to have an impact on their capacity to protect the interests of workers over time. This reflects a much broader trend. This is the picture from the U.S. Of the decline of union membership as industrial jobs have gone away. Unions have gotten smaller and smaller, particularly private sector unions, and we saw how that coincided with the growth of inequality, the hollowing out and stagnation of middle class incomes, and the declining fortunes of the middle class, both in absolute terms as they faced harder and harder difficulties in achieving the same real income, often having to go from 1 to 2 earners, being decreasingly able to afford college for their children, and often having to finance their children well into adulthood. So this is a broader context where we've seen this impact of globalization, technology, and slow growth. We have aging populations in many of these developed countries, which has put increasing stress on their fiscal states as ever-shrinking employed, what we call the non-dependent part of the population is supporting an ever-increasing dependent population. The collapse of the corporatist consensus between business and labor that underpinned many of the social democratic welfare states in the post-World War II era, which really depended on relatively large, stable, labor-oriented parties making deals with relatively large, stable, business-oriented parties that were then blessed through the political system and maintained the social democratic order. All of that's been weakening, shrinking, and so we have had this fragmentation of parties. All of this has made it much harder for governments to govern and has led voters to make demands for reform, some of which we have talked about in a previous lecture and some more of which we're going to talk about today. And it's led to the rise of anti-system parties. And one of the, if you like, tragedies of the politics of the last several decades is the extent to which political reforms have been fixing things that were not broken. We saw this, I think, particularly dramatically in the United Kingdom in the 1970s. Aside from the war decades, the 1970s were surely the most challenging economic decade that Britain experienced, although they certainly were not alone. The 70s were very difficult here because of the oil shocks from the Yom Kippur War